Book 11. Dawn left ocean and ascended the sky. Aeneas yearned to devote these hours to the burial of his dead, but as victor he must fulfill his vows in the day's first light. He erected the trunk of a mighty oak high on a mound, and clothed the woods in the gleaming arms stripped from Mezentius, a trophy to you, O great lord of war. He nailed up the crests, dewy with blood, and the breastplate pierced a dozen times. On its left side he bound the shield of bronze and hung from its neck the ivory sword. Then, surrounded by the army's generals, he exhorted his triumphant comrades. Well done, men! We have nothing to fear now. These are the spoils of a high and mighty king. This is Mezentius, done by my own hands. We march now to Latium, and Latium's king. Prepare your arms with a will, and look forward to battle, so that when the gods give us the nod to raise our standards and lead our men out of camp, we will not be delayed by poor logistics or lack of resolve. But now we must commit it to earth the unburied bodies of our comrades, their only honor in Acheron below. Go and dignify with final rites those noble souls who with their blood have claimed this land for us. But first send Pallas to Evander's mourning city, Pallas whom, brave though he was, a black day has plunged into bitter death. Aeneas wept as he spoke, and walked back to the threshold where Pallas's lifeless body was laid, watched by old Acotes. This man had once been Evander's armor-bearer. Now, a sadder duty, he accompanied his beloved ward in death. All around stood the funeral party, the Trojan throng and the women of Ilium, their hair unbound. When Aeneas entered the great doorway, they beat their breasts, and their lamentation filled the room and rose to the stars. Aeneas looked at Pallas. His head was propped on a pillow, and his face was white as snow. His smooth breast gaped with the wound from an Ausonian spear. Aeneas's tears welled up as he spoke. Was it you, poor boy, that fortune begrudged, to look upon my realm and ride in triumph to your father's home? This was not the pledge I gave Evander when he embraced me at my departure, sending me forth with you to win great empire, and warning me in fear that our enemy was a tough breed of men. And now he might very well in vain hope be making vows and heaping the altars high, while we in sorrow bestow empty honors upon his dead son, who owes no more to any of the gods above. Pitiable man, you will see the bitter funeral of your son. Is this our return, our awaited triumph, my solemn pledge? But you will not, Evander, look upon a son routed by shameful wounds, nor, as a father, pray for death, because your son chose life before honor. Ah, Ausonia, what a hero you have lost, and Aeolus, what an ally. Aeneas ended his lament and ordered them to lift the piteous corpse. He chose 1,000 men to attend the funeral and share the father's tears. Small solace for sorrow so great, but a grieving father's due. A wicker bier was quickly fashioned out of arbute shoots and sprigs of oaks, and covered with a canopy of leaves. They lifted him high onto his rustic bed, like a flower plucked by a young girl, a tender violet or drooping hyacinth, still glowing and beautiful, but no more does Mother Earth sustain its life. Then Aeneas brought out 2 purple robes that Sidonian Dido had made for him with her own hands, a labor of love, embroidering them with stiff threads of gold. He draped one of them around the youth as a final honor, veiling the locks of hair that the fire would burn. He heaped up many prizes from the Laurentine battle, and ordered that these spoils be carried in a long procession. He added horses and armor stripped from the enemy, and he bound the hands of the captives he meant to offer to the shades, sprinkling the flames on the funeral pyre with sacrificial blood. He charged the captains to bear tree trunks covered with enemy weapons and affixed with the enemy's names. Old Acotes was led along, disfiguring his breast with his fists, his face with his nails, and prostrating himself full length on the ground. They led Pallas's chariot, too, spattered with Rutulian blood. Behind it, the war horse Aethon, insignia laid aside, walked weeping, his face wet with tears. 2 men carried Pallas's spear and helmet, the rest of the armor Turnus, as victor, held. There followed behind an army in mourning, Teucrians, all the Tuscans and Arcadians, with arms reversed. When the entire retinue had advanced far ahead, Aeneas halted, and with a deep groan spoke once more. War's grim duty calls me to other tears. Hail forevermore, most noble Pallas, and forever farewell. Saying no more, he turned his steps toward the walls of the camp. And now the envoys from Latium arrived, shaded with olive and asking for a truce. They requested Aeneas to return the bodies that lay on the field and allow them burial. They pleaded that there could be no quarrel with men who had lost the light of heaven, nor with men once called their host and kin. Aeneas could hardly refuse this request, and generously granted it, adding, "What undeserved ill fortune, Latins, has entangled you in a war so terrible that you turn away from us, your friends? You request peace for the war dead. Gladly, I would grant it for the living as well. I would never have come had not fate assigned me a home here, nor am I at war with your people, but with your king, who broke our alliance and trusted instead to Turnus's arms. It would have been more just for Turnus himself to face this death. If he wanted to end the war by force and drive out the Trojans, he should have fought me with these weapons. Only one of us would have lived, whether by heaven's grace or his own strong hand. Go now, and place your countrymen on the pyre." Then aged Drances, who hated Turnus, and always denounced the younger man, answered in turn, "Trojan hero, great in glory, greater in arms, how may I sing your praises? Should I marvel first at your justice, or your prowess in war? We will indeed gratefully bear these words to our city, and, if fortune allows, unite you with our king, Latinus. Let Turnus make his own alliance. We will be pleased to raise your destined walls and carry on our shoulders the stones of Troy." Drances spoke, and all murmured their assent. They set the truce at twice 6 days, and in that settled peace Trojans and Latins roamed the wooded ridges side by side. Tall ash trees rang under 2-edged axes. They felled pines whose crests swept the stars, cleaved oak and fragrant cedar ceaselessly, and hauled the woods away in groaning cart. Rumor took wing and heralded this sorrow to Evander, filling his city with news. Rumor, who had just announced the triumph of Pallas to all of Latium. The Arcadians hurried to the gate, holding ritual torches. The road gleamed with a long line of flames stretching through the fields. The Trojans advanced to meet them, and the mourners joined companies. When the women saw them approach their house, their shrieks inflamed the grieving city. Nothing could hold Evander back. As soon as the bier was set down, he flung himself on Pallas and clung to him, weeping and groaning, until at last he could speak through his anguish. "This is not what you promised your father, Pallas. No, you said you would be extra cautious in committing yourself to the god of war. I knew very well what the first taste of glory could do, how bitter the first battle could be. But how bitter were the first fruits of your youth, how hard the first lessons of war. My prayers were heard by none of the gods. Oh, my sainted wife, how happy in the death that saved you from this grief. But I have, by living, destroyed my destiny. A father should not survive his son. If only I had marched to war as an ally of Troy, and fallen beneath Rutulian fire. If only I had given up my life, and this procession were bringing me, not Pallas, home. I would not blame you, Trojans, nor your pact, nor our hands joined in friendship. This fate was owed to my white hair. But if an early death awaited my son, it will comfort me that he fell after slaying thousands of Volscians, and while leading the Trojans into Latium. Yes, my Pallas, I would think you worthy of no other funeral than loyal Aeneas does, and the mighty Phrygians, the Tuscan captains, and the entire Tyrrhenian army. They bear great trophies of the men you killed, and you, also, Turnus, would now be just a great standing trunk decked with arms, if your strength of years had been like his. But why do I, poor wretch, keep the Trojans from war? If I drag out a life hateful to me with Pallas gone, the reason is your right hand, Aeneas, which you know owes Turnus to my son, and to me his father. That is the only field of honor left to you, the only fortune. I do not ask for joy in life. I do not ask for the impossible, but only to bring word down to my son among the shades below. Dawn lifted her gentle light for weary mortals, bringing back all their labors. Father Aeneas and Tarchon had set up funeral pyres on the curving shore. Here they each brought the bodies of their men, each in the manner of their forebears, and, when the smoky fires were lit beneath, high heaven was buried in the darkening gloom. 3 times they circled the burning pyres in their gleaming bronze. 3 times on horseback they rounded the mournful death fires and wailed aloud. Earth was showered with tears, their armor glistening with tears. The cries of men and the trumpets' blare mounted to heaven. Some cast upon the fire spoils stripped from slain Latins, helmets, ornate swords, bridles, and chariot wheels. Others burned offerings familiar to the dead, their own shields and luckless weapons. All around many cattle were sacrificed to death. Bristling hogs and stock taken in raids had their throats cut over the flames. Then all along the shore men watched their comrades burning and kept vigil over the charred pyres, unable to tear themselves away until dewy night, studded with blazing stars, rolled up the sky. Elsewhere the Latins built their own pyres for their own innumerable dead. Some they interred in the earth, others they lifted and carried to neighboring farms or sent home to the city. The rest, a huge mass of confused slaughter, they burned without distinction. Everywhere the wide fields outshone each other with clusters of fires. When the third dawn dispelled the sky's cold shadow, mournfully they raked the ash-clotted bones from the pyres and heaped warm earth above them. The lamentation inside Latinus's rich city now reached a crescendo. Here mothers and their sons, widows, here the loving hearts of sorrowful sisters and boys bereft of fathers, cursed the terrible war and Turnus's marriage. They wanted him to decide the issue in combat, the very man who laid claim to Italy's realm and its highest honors. Drances weighed in and fiercely affirmed that Turnus alone was summoned to battle. At the same time, many voices voiced a different opinion in favor of Turnus. The queen's great name protected him, and many a tale of Turnus's prowess supported the hero. The crowning touch for all this turmoil was the arrival of gloomy envoys reporting the response of great Diomedes. Nothing had been gained. Their gifts of gold and all their prayers had netted nothing. Latium must look elsewhere for military aid or sue for peace with the Trojan king. Latinus sank under his burden of grief. Aeneas was a man of destiny. The gods were angry. He stared at the fresh graves, then he issued a royal command for his councilmen to convene in his palace. They streamed through the city's streets and assembled under the king's roof. In their midst, eldest in years and first in state, sat Latinus, his brow furrowed. He summoned the envoys who had just returned from the Aetolian city, and he demanded a full report from each in turn. Silence reigned, and then Venulus, as ordered, began to speak. Citizens, we have seen Diomedes and his Argive camp. We completed our journey, overcame all perils, and grasped the hand by which Ilium fell. He was still building his city, Agrippa, named after his father's race. As victor in the fields of Iapygian Garganus, we entered, were given permission to speak, presented our gifts, told him our names, the name of our country and its invaders, and the purpose of our visit to Arpi. He listened and replied with calm demeanor. Sons of Saturn and ancient Ausonia, a people blessed, what has disturbed your peace and leads you to provoke a dangerous war? All of us who profaned Ilium's fields with steel have suffered for it. I do not mention what we endured in the war itself, beneath Troy's high walls or the heroes drowned in the Simois River. No, I mean all the unspeakable punishments inflicted upon us throughout the world for our transgressions. Even Priam would take pity on us. Witness Minerva's baleful star, the cliffs of Euboea, avenging Caphareus. After the war, we were driven to distant shores. Menelaus, as far as the pillars of Proteus. Ulysses has seen the Cyclopes on Aetna. Then there is Neoptolemus's kingdom, Idomeneus's devastated home, and Locrians living on Libya's shore. Even the Mycenaean Agamemnon himself had scarcely crossed his threshold when he fell by his evil wife's hand, the conqueror of Asia, undone by a lurking adulterer. To think that the gods begrudge me the sight of my longed-for wife and lovely Calydon, never to return to my country's altars. I am still pursued by dreadful portents. My lost comrades have taken wing to the sky or haunt the rivers as birds. O my people, and fill the cliffs with their tearful cries. What else should I have expected, insanely assaulting celestial bodies and profaning the hand of Venus with steel? No, do not urge me into such battles. I am not at war with the Trojans, not since Pergamum's towers fell, and I find no joy in remembering these ancient troubles. The gifts that you bring me from your country, take them to Aeneas instead. I have faced his steely weapons, fought him hand to hand. Trust me to know how big he looms up above his shield, how he throws his spear with whirlwind force. If Ida's land had borne two more like him, the Dardanians would have invaded Argos, and all Greece would be in mourning. The tables turned. In all the time we spent besieging Troy, it was only Hector and Aeneas who held us off until the 10th year. Both were preeminent in courage and arms. Aeneas was first in loyalty. Join him in peace. Beware of meeting him in war. You have heard my lord Diomedes' reply and his counsel on this momentous war. The envoys had just finished when troubled murmurs rippled through the Ausonian assembly. Like the sound that comes from a pent-up stream that has been blocked by boulders, the current churns and the close banks echo the rushing water. When they had calmed down, Latinus spoke from his high throne. After calling on the gods, he said, I wish we had already decided this crucial issue, Latins. It is not good to be holding council when the enemy sits outside our walls. This war, my countrymen, is ill-omened. We are fighting a race of gods, invincible men, unwearied in battle, unable even when beaten to release the sword. If you had any hope for Aetolian aid, dismiss it. Each is his own hope, but you see how slender is ours. Your complete ruin is before your eyes. You can reach out and touch it. I do not blame anyone. What valor could do has been done. We have given all we have. Now listen, and I will briefly lay out my opinion as to what we should do. There is an ancient tract of land I own beside the Tuscan River, stretching westward even beyond Sicania. Oroncans and Rutulians work the fields, plowing the hillsides and grazing the rough slopes. Let this entire region with a belt of mountain pine be ceded to the Trojans in goodwill, or just terms, with an invitation to share our realm. Let them settle there, if that is their heart's desire, and build a city. But if they have a mind to seize other lands, and can leave our soil, let us build 20 ships of Italian oak, or, if they can fill more, the timber lies hard by the sea. They themselves can prescribe the number of vessels in their design. We will provide bronze, labor, and shipyards. Further, to bring word of this and seal the pact, it pleases me to send 100 envoys, Latin nobles, holding bows before them and bearing gifts, talents of gold and ivory, a throne and robe, insignia of our realm. Take counsel now, and save our weary state. Then Drances, hostile as ever, bitter with a secret envy of Turnus' glory, a wealthy man and a silver orator, but cold in battle, respected in council but prone to faction, of noble lineage, on his mother's side but with a lowly father. This Drances rose, and with these words he magnified their anger and built their rage. This is no mystery you consult us on, my good king, and needs no voice from us. Everyone knows what is called for here, but we all mumble in our beards. Let one man dismiss his pride and give us freedom to speak, the man through whose perversity and ominous generalship I will speak out. Even if he threatens me with death. So many of our shining leaders have fallen, and the whole city is sunk in grief, while he shakes his fist at heaven and attacks the Trojans, knowing he can bolt whenever he pleases. Add one more gift for the Dardanians, one more, my excellent lord, and let no man prevent you by force from giving your daughter, as a father may, to a peerless husband, in a worthy marriage, an eternal covenant, and a bond of peace. But if the fear in our hearts is so great, we should entreat the prince himself, implore him to renounce his own rights, and defer out of grace to country and king. You, the source and cause of Latium's ills, why do you so often hurl its citizens into harm's way? There is no safety in war. We ask for peace, Turnus, and we ask you for the one inviolable pledge of peace. I first, whom you imagine to be your enemy, which I do not deny, I am here before you on bended knee. Pity your people, put down your pride, admit defeat, and withdraw. We have seen enough death and desolation. But if glory is everything to you, if you feel such strength in your heart, or if a royal dowry is so dear to your heart, be bold, and shout a fearless heart to the enemy. Oh yes, please, so that Turnus can have his royal bride. Let our worthless lives, the unburied and unwept masses, be strewn on the field. But you, my friend, if you have any might, any of your father's fighting spirit, at least look your opponent in the eye. Turnus's rage now burst into flames. He groaned and then erupted into speech. You always have a full supply of words whenever battle calls for action, Drances, always first in line when council is called, but there is no need to fill the council house now with those big words that fly out of you while you are safe behind our fortress walls. And the trenches have not yet filled with blood. Go ahead, thunder in eloquence, your usual style, and accuse me of cowardice, Drances, when and if you have created mounds of slaughtered Teucrians and left fields everywhere marked with your trophies. Give it a try, see what live valor can do. One thing is sure, we have no shortage of enemies. Our walls are surrounded by them. What are you waiting for? Are we going to attack, or will your god of war always be your windy words and flying feet? I should admit defeat? You watch your tongue, you dirty liar. Who's going to say I'm beaten when he sees the Tiber swollen with Trojan blood, Evander's house and all his line laid low, and his Arcadian troops stripped of their armor? Bitias and giant Pandarus didn't think that I was beaten, or the 1,000 men I sent to hell in one fighting day, even though I was cooped inside the enemy's walls. No safety in war? You fool! Sing that song for the Trojan's head and your own property. Go on, keep throwing everyone into a panic, touting the prowess of a twice-conquered people, and running down Latinus's army. Now the Myrmidons tremble before the Phrygian arms. There go Tydeus' son, and Achilles of Larissa, and Aufidus flows back from the Adriatic Sea. What about when he pretends, the cunning bastard, to fear my threats just to make me look bad? You will never lose your pathetic life, don't worry, by my right hand. Keep it, you gutless wonder. Now, Father, to return to your great question, if you put no further hope in our arms, if we are so utterly lost and ruined after one setback and fortune cannot return, we should sue for peace with outstretched hands. But, oh, to have any of our familiar valor! The luckiest man on earth and the finest is the man who, to avoid such a sight, has fallen in death and bitten the dust. But if we still have resources and sound troops and the cities of Italy are still behind us, if the Trojans too have paid for glory and blood, they too have suffered casualties, the storm was the same for everyone, why do we falter so ingloriously at the first steps? Why do we tremble before the trumpet sounds? Time and the shifting tide of events have improved many situations. Fortune revisits many a man, first mocking him and then setting him upon firmer ground. The Aetolian in Arpi will not help us, but Messapus will, as will the prosperous Tolumnius and the leading men of many a nation. Latium and Laurentium will send their best, and we have Camilla, too, leader of the glorious Volscians, with her cavalry and squadrons flowering in bronze. But if I am called out to single combat by the Trojan, and this is your pleasure, and I am so great an obstacle to the common good, know that victory has not deserted these hands of mine with such loathing that I would refuse to dare all that I have for a hope so high. I will face him with spirit, even though he comes on like great Achilles himself, and wears armor made by Vulcan's hands. To all of you, and to Latinus, father of my bride, I, Turnus, second in valor to none of my ancestors, dedicate my life. Aeneas calls me out. I pray that he does, and that it is not Drances, but I, who appease the gods with death, if they are angry, or win glory for valor. While the Latins fought among themselves and debated an uncertain future, Aeneas was moving his troops from the camp. A messenger rushed through the general uproar in Latinus's halls and filled the city with great alarm. Teucrians and Tuscans were sweeping down from the Tiber River in battle formation and covering the plain. The townspeople were stunned and then, bitten by the danger, gave way to panic. Shaking with fear, they called for weapons. The young raged for weapons, while their fathers wept and moaned, and a great din arose, a discordant roar that rose to the sky. As when flocks of birds settle in a grove, or when by the fish-filled stream of Padusa, raucous swans call out among clamorous pools, Turnus seized the moment and cried, "Right, convene a council, citizens, and sit there praising peace. The enemy is attacking our kingdom." And he rushed out from the high halls, issuing commands. Bolessus, get the Volscian squadrons armed and lead out the Rutulians. Chorus, you and your brother, and you, Messapus, deploy the cavalry on the plain. Post some guards at the city gates and man the towers. The rest are going into battle under my command. The whole city rushed to the walls. Latinus, overwhelmed by this grim turn of events, quit the council and abandoned his plans. He blamed himself for not warmly welcoming Dardanian Aeneas and adopting him as a son for the good of the city. Details set to work digging trenches in front of the gates and hauling stones and stakes. A horn sounded its bloody signal for battle. Mothers and boys ringed the walls. The final struggle summoned them all. The queen herself rode with a throng of women to the temple of Pallas on the high citadel, bearing gifts, and at her side, eyes lowered modestly, was the maiden Lavinia, the cause of all this misery. The women went up and filled the temple with clouds of incense. Their sad voices drifted down from the threshold. Mistress of war, Tritonian maiden, break the spear of the Phrygian marauder and lay him out on the ground before our gates. Meanwhile, Turnus armed himself for battle, and every move he made was an act of passion. Strapping on the flashing bronze breastplate, sheathing his calves with gold, and head still bare, buckling the sword to his side. He shone golden as he ran down from the high citadel, his exultant mind already engaging the enemy. A horse has broken his halter and bolted out of his stall, free at last, and now gallops over the plain, making for the mares in pasture, or his accustomed swim in the river. He holds his head high, and whinnies with joy, mane streaming like wind on his shoulders. Camilla, with her army of Volscians, rode to meet him, and when she reached the gates, the warrior queen leapt down from her horse. Following her lead, her troops dismounted and slid to the ground. Then Camilla spoke. "Turnus, if the brave can trust themselves, I commit myself to face Aeneas's cavalry and ride alone against the Tuscan horsemen. Let me try my hand at the first encounter, while you stay on foot to guard the city walls." And Turnus, eyes fixed on this formidable woman. "Glory of Italy, how can I ever give you sufficient thanks? But since your spirit outmatches all I could say or do to repay you, yes, share the work with me. That dog Aeneas, as rumor has it, and scouts confirm, has sent his cavalry ahead to scour the plain. He himself has crossed the ridge, and is now marching on the city through the mountain pass. I am concealing units under the canopy on the forest road to block both ends of the gorge. Muster the troops, and wait for the attack by the Tuscan cavalry. With you will be Messapus, a good man, the Latin troops, and Tiburtus's squad. You're in command." He spoke, and with similar words encouraged Messapus and the other allied captains, and then he moved out against the enemy. There is a jagged valley, a perfect place for stratagems of war, both sides walled with dark forest. It can be reached only by a narrow path through a deep gorge, a difficult approach. High above, among the mountain peaks, lies a plain invisible from below, a safe staging area from which to launch sorties right or left, or to take a stand and roll down boulders. Turnus hurried there by familiar roads and lay in wait in the treacherous woods. Diana, meanwhile, in the halls above, addressed Opis, one of her sacred sisterhood, with these sorrowful words. Camilla is entering this bloody war, Opis, and girding herself with our weapons in vain. Camilla, whom I love as no other. There is no new love for me, no sudden sweet infatuation on Diana's part. Metabus was driven from his throne by his subjects' hatred of his tyranny, and as he was fleeing ancient Privernum, in the heat of battle he took with him his infant daughter, to share his exile. Casmilla, her mother's name, was changed by Metabus into Camilla. Holding her to his chest, he headed out to a lonely stretch of mountain forest with armed Volscians closing in on him from every side. Blocking his flight was the Amasenus, which had flooded its banks after a great heavy storm. As the fugitive prepared to swim, he was held back by love and fear for his precious burden. Quickly weighing his options, he settled on this. He was holding in his hand a huge spear with a hard, burly shaft of seasoned oak, and to this shaft he fastened his daughter, swaddled in the bark of a forest cork tree, binding her tightly to the balance point. Then, cradling the spear in his huge right hand, he cried out to heaven, Lady of the woods, gracious daughter of Latona, this child I, her father, vow to your service. Yours is the first weapon she grasps as suppliant, flying through the air to escape her foe. Accept her as yours, goddess, I implore you, as I commit her now to the perilous air. He spoke, drew back his arm, and hurled the spear, sending poor Camilla flying over the loud, rushing water on the whistling shaft. Metabus, hard-pressed, entrusted himself to the river, and emerged triumphant to pluck from the surf the spear and the girl, his gift to Diana. No cities welcomed him into their walls, not that he, in his wild state, would have accepted. He lived among shepherds in the lonely hills, and there, amid the woods and rugged lairs of beasts, he nursed his child in a wild mare's milk, pressing the teats into her tender lips. As soon as the baby could take her first steps, he put into her hands a little sharp spear, and slung on her back a quiver and bow. Instead of gold for her hair and a trailing robe, a tiger skin hung from her head and shoulders. Even then she hurled her childish spears with tender hands, and twirled her leather sling around her head to bring down snowy swans and Stramonian cranes. Many a mother in Tyrrhenian towns prayed for her to marry her son, but she was always content with Diana alone, and violate in her love for her weapons and her chastity. Oh, that she had not been swept up in this war, or tried to challenge the Teucrians. She would still be my dear companion. But now, since bitter fate presses her hard, glide down from heaven, nymph, to Latium, where battle is joined under an evil star. Take these, and draw from the quiver an avenging arrow. With this in his throat, may anyone, Italian or Trojan, who violates her sacred body with a wound, pay me an equal penalty in blood. Then, in a hollow cloud, I will bear the poor girl's body and armor all unspoiled away to the tomb, and lay her to rest in her fatherland. Diana spoke, and Opis swooped down through the light air of heaven, shrouding herself in dark, whirling wind. The Trojans now were approaching the walls with the Etruscan leaders and their squadrons of mounted troops. The war horses neighed and pranced, swerving all over the plain, fighting their reins, and the field was spiked with lifted iron spear points flashing light. Advancing toward them, the swift Latins, led by Messapus, by Chorus and his brother, and by Camilla, the warrior princess, came into view, pumping their spears. The sound of horses and men intensified, and then both armies halted, standing with a spear cast of each other. Then, with a sudden shout, both sides charged, spurring on their furious horses. Weapons showered down as thick as snowflakes, and their shadows darkened the sky. Tyrrhenus and Acontius, spears leveled, were first to charge each other and first to fall. Their horses collided chest to chest, with a deafening crash, crippling both. Acontius was flung off like a thunderbolt or a stone shot by a catapult and scattered his life into the air. This sent a tremor through the battle lines, and the Latins, shields on their backs now, turned their horses toward the city walls. The Trojans gave chase. Acilius in the lead. When the Latins were almost to the gates, they shouted and wheeled their horses around, reins pulling their supple necks, and then the Trojans turned and let their horses run. Picture the sea surging in and ebbing. A huge swell rushes to shore, breaking over the rocks in a foaming arch of water and drenching the farthest reach of sand, then seething back over the rolling stones as the shallows recede and leave the shore dry. Twice the Tuscans drove the Rutulians back to the city, their shields slung behind. But when they met for the third time, the lines interlocked, and they fought man to man. The battle became a welter of bodies, weapons, the groans of the dying, horses floundering on their slaughtered riders and dying themselves, knee-deep in blood. Orsilochus shot his spear at Remulus's horse, too afraid to confront the rider himself, and left the steel just beneath its ear. The horse reared in agony, pawing the air and unseating Remulus, who rolled to the ground. Catillus took down Iolaus and Herminius, a man of huge stature and with courage to match. His blond head bare, chest and shoulders unarmored, unafraid of wounds, he was an enormous target. Catillus' spear came quivering through his broad torso and doubled him over, transfixed with pain. Everywhere you looked, blood ran dark as struggling men killed each other with iron, seeking through wounds of a glorious death. And in the center of all this slaughter, Camilla raged, an exultant Amazon, one breast bared for battle, a quiver on her back, whipping javelins from her hand or wielding a heavy battle axe for hours on end, Diana's golden bow clanging on her shoulder, and when she was forced by pressure behind to withdraw, she turned in her saddle, bow in hand, and took aim as she fled. Around her were her hand-picked companions, Virgin Larina and Tulla and Tarpeia, slicing the air with her bronze battle axe, daughters of Italy whom godlike Camilla chose as her glory in both peace and war. Think of Amazons in Thrace tramping across the Thermodon streams, following Hippolyte as they go to war with emblazoned weapons, or gathered round Penthesilea, daughter of Mars, when she returns in her chariot, an army of women howling in triumph as they leap exultantly with crescent shields. Whom did you strike first, fierce girl? Whom last? How many dying bodies did you leave on the earth? Eunymus was first, Clytius' son, whose exposed chest Camilla ripped through with her long pine spear. He fell, coughing up blood and chewing the crimson dust, as he writhed on his wound. Then she brought down Liris and Pegasus on top of him. Liris was falling from his horse, which had just been hit, clutching at the reins, when Pegasus rode up to lend a helping hand. The pair crashed down headfirst together. She quickly added Amastris, son of Hippotas, and leaning into long-range spear casts, Tyreus, Harpalycus, Demophoon, and Chromis, killing a Phrygian with every weapon that left her hand. The hunter Ornytus, wearing strange armor, rode at a distance on a Iappian horse. Oxhide protected the warrior's shoulders. His head was covered by the white-fanged jaws of a wolf's gaping mouth, and he carried a rustic pike in his hands. He was a full head above the other riders, clustering around him. Camilla caught him, which was no great trouble, pierced him through, and cried in a voice without a trace of pity, "Did you think you were hunting animals, Tuscan? This is the day all your big talk is squelched by a woman's weapons. But you can boast of this to your ancestral shades, that you went down by Camilla's spear." Next were Butes and Orsilochus, two of the biggest bodies in the Trojan army. Butes she got with a spear from behind as he sat on his horse, the point going in where the neck shows between the helmet and corselet, just above the shield's rim. She let Orsilochus chase her in a wide circle and then wheeled into a tighter ring and pursued the pursuer. Rising in the saddle, she hacked away with her battle axe through armor and bone, while he begged over and over for mercy. His warm brain spattered his face. Onus's warrior son then fell in her way, terrified to see her. He was from the Apennines, and not the least of the Ligurians, while fate allowed him his deceitful life. When this man saw he could not escape combat by outriding or outmaneuvering the princess warrior, he resorted to a clever ruse, saying, "What's so great about a woman who relies on a strong horse? Why don't you meet me on a level field and fight me on foot, hand to hand? You'll soon find out who is deceived by windy vanity." Camilla, furious, burned with indignation. She handed her horse's reins to a comrade and, wholly unafraid, confronted the man on foot with equal arms, a naked sword and plain light shield. Thinking he had won by guile, Aunus's son pulled his horse around and spurred him into a willing gallop. "You Ligurian fool, your slippery tricks aren't going to work this time. Cunning won't get you home safe to lying Aunus." She spoke, and with feet like lightning she intercepted the horse, seized the reins, and took her vengeance in his hated blood. A falcon sacred to Mars swoops down from a high rock and overtakes a dove flying in a cloud. Clutching her in his hooked talons, he rips her to pieces, and gore and torn feathers drift from the sky. The Father of gods and men saw these things with all-seeing eyes as he sat on Olympus. He roused Tyrrhenian Tarchon to battle, inflaming him with spite and rage, and so Tarchon rode through the murderous lanes of war, shouting encouragement to his faltering troops, calling each man by name and rallying them. "What are you afraid of, Tyrrhenians? Where's your sense of shame? Are you just lazy? Or is this rank cowardice? Letting a woman scatter you like this and drive you back? Why do you think we carry these swords? You're not lazy when it comes to the nightly wars of love. When the flute signals Bacchic dances, you're waiting for the cups to be set on the table for the feast, aren't you? This is what you like. You can hardly wait until the priest announces the sacrifice and the fatted ox calls you to the deep groves." And he spurred his horses into the melee, ready to die. He came at Venulus like a cyclone, tore him from his horse, and holding him to his chest with one hand, urged on his horse and carried the man off. The Latins cheered when they saw this, and Tarchon bolted over the plain carrying arms and the man. He snapped off the iron point of Venulus's spear and groped around for an unarmored patch of his captive's skin, where he could inflict a mortal wound. Venulus struggled, keeping Tarchon's hand away from his throat, meeting force with force. A golden eagle soars on an updraft, carrying a snake she has caught, her talons entwined around it. The wounded serpent, writhing sinuously, scales bristling, lifts its hissing mouth high, but the eagle keeps attacking her struggling victim with her hooked beak, and her wings beat the air. So Tarchon carried off his prey triumphantly from the Tiburtine army. His Maeonians followed their chief's shining example and ran forward. Aruns, marked by fate, circled Camilla warily, looking for a chance to use his javelin. Whenever she attacked in her fury, Aruns crept up from behind, stalking her silently. Whenever victorious she stepped out of battle, Aruns stealthily turned his horse in her direction, circling, probing, looking for an opening, and always pumping his unerring spear. It happened that Clorius, a Trojan and formerly a priest of Cybele, resplendent in his Phrygian armor, was charging ahead on his foaming stallion. This horse was caparisoned, bedecked in a skin plated with bronze scales and buckled with gold. Clorius himself shone in exotic purple and shot Cretan arrows from a Lycian bow. Golden the bow and golden his helmet, and the rustling folds of his saffron cloak were clasped with gold. The tunic he wore and his Asian leggings were finely embroidered. Camilla wanted either to hang these weapons as spoils in a temple or to wear the gold herself. In any case, she singled out Clorius and chased him down like a huntress, oblivious to all else and raging recklessly through the ranks of men with a woman's passion for booty and spoils. Aruns saw his chance and finally sprang into action, spear in hand, as he prayed to heaven in words such as these: "Lord God Apollo, guardian of holy Soracte, where we, your votaries, adherents, pass through the fire in our faith and walk with bare feet over the embers, grant that this disgrace be effaced by our arms, O Father Almighty. I seek no plunder, no spoils, no trophy for this woman's defeat. Other feats will bring me fame. If only this dread plague falls beneath my blow, I will return inglorious to my fatherland." Apollo heard his prayer. and in his heart granted half of it, and scattered half to the winds. Arruns would defeat Camilla, yes, and lay her low in death, but his high fatherland would never see his return. That prayer the winds bore away to the southern storms, and so, as the spear flew from his hand and hissed through the air, all the Volscians burned their eyes and hearts to their queen, turned their eyes and hearts to their queen, but she herself noticed neither air nor sound nor weapon coming out of the sky, until the spear transfixed her bare breast and drank her virgin blood from deep within. Her comrades hurried around her in alarm, and caught their mistress as she fell. Arruns, more frightened than any of them, ran away in mingled joy and fear, unwilling to trust his own spear or face Camilla's weapons. Having killed a shepherd or a great steer, a wolf will run before men can come after him with their hostile spears. Aware that he has done something reckless, he loses himself in the trackless mountains, tucking his quivering tail beneath his belly. So too Arruns, in his panic, wanted only to be out of sight, and to this end he plunged into the thick of battle. Camilla's dying hand pulled at the spear, but the iron point was stuck deep in her ribs. Drained of blood, she sank back. The chill light sank in her eyes, and her face, formerly so radiant, turned pale in death. As she drew her last breath, she called Acca, who was her own age, loyal to Camilla, beyond all others, and the only one to share her cares, and said to her, "I've been strong so far, sister Acca, but now this bitter wound is finishing me, and everything is growing dark. With shadows, hurry and bring to Turnus my last command, to take my place in battle and keep the Trojans from the city. And now, goodbye." Camilla spoke, dropped the reins, and slipped to the ground unwillingly. As her body grew cold, she slowly freed herself from all its bonds, relaxing her neck and letting her head fall into the grip of death. Finally, she released her weapons, and with a moan, her soul fled resentfully down to the shades. The roar that followed broke through the sky and struck the golden stars. With Camilla down, the fight intensified and all forces converged. The Teucrian army, the Etruscan captains, and Evander's Arcadian squadrons. Opis, Diana's sentinel, had been calmly watching the war, a long time from her mountain seat. When she saw, far off in the din of combat, Camilla pay the penalty of death, she spoke these words from her heart's deep core. "Ah, Camilla, you have paid too cruel a penalty, too cruel, for challenging the Trojans in battle. It has not helped you that you worship Diana alone in the woods, or wore our quiver on your shoulder. But your queen has not left you dishonored in the hour of death, and your doom will be renowned among the nations. Nor will you be disgraced as one unavenged. Whoever violated your body with a wound will pay with his life." At the foot of the mountain stood the great burial mound of Dercenas, a Laurentine king of old, shaded by ilex. The beautiful goddess touched down here, and from the high barrow spotted Arruns. When she saw him swelling with pride in his gleaming armor, she cried, "Why are you going off? Turn your steps this way. Come over here to die, and receive for Camilla your just reward. Not that you are worthy of Diana's arrows." Thus the Thracian nymph, and she pulled from the gilded quiver a feathered arrow, and stretched the bow deliberately until its curving tips were almost touching. Her left hand up against the arrow's metal point, right hand and bowstring back against her breast. Arruns heard the arrow whir through the air at the same moment that it pierced his chest. He gasped his life away in the nameless dust, forgotten by his comrades, and Opis winged her way to high Olympus. Their commander lost, Camilla's light cavalry was the first unit to retreat. The Rutulians then withdrew, as did the fighter Atinus. Scattered captains and abandoned troops, seeking safety, wheeled their horses around and galloped back toward the walls. None of them could stop the Trojan onslaught or even stand against it. They slung their unstrung bows on their sagging shoulders and their horses' hoofs pounded the crumbling plain. A dark cloud of dust rolled to the walls, and in the watchtowers mothers beat their breasts and raised their cries to the stars. The first group to race inside the open gates was followed so closely by the enemy that their ranks mingled, and far from escaping a piteous death, they were sliced open on the very threshold of their native city and gasped out their lives under the shelter of their own homes. Some closed the gates and did not dare open them for their friends, no matter how much they pleaded. The slaughter was heartbreaking. Citizens, rushing on the defenders' swords, shut out before the eyes of their weeping parents. Some were stampeded into the trenches, while others charged blindly at the stout gates and battered the strongly barred doors. Even the mothers defended the walls, rivaling Camilla out of love of their country, hurling missiles from their trembling hands, oak poles and seared stakes in place of hard steel, each burned to die first, defending the walls. Meanwhile, Acca brought her grim message to Turnus, still in the forest, and filled his mind with a picture of immense devastation. The Volscian ranks destroyed, Camilla fallen, the enemy advanced relentlessly, sweeping everything before them in triumph. And the panic that had spread to the town, raging, and this was the stern will of Zeus. Turnus abandoned the ambush in the hills and left the forest. He had just reached the plain and was out of sight when Father Aeneas entered the open pass, scaled the ridge, and came out from the shadows of the wood. So both men marched rapidly toward the city, with all their troops no great distance apart. Aeneas saw on the plain ahead clouds of dust tramped up by the Laurentine army, and at the same moment Turnus became aware of Aeneas's advance, heard the marching feet and the snorting horses. They would have joined battle at once, but the rose-red sun was already bathing his weary team in the western waters. And so, as day ebbed and night was coming on, one army encamped before the city, and the other strengthened its walls.